Einen wunderschönen guten Abend hier an der Universität für Bodenkultur im Ilse-Valentin-Haus. Wir sind heute hier zusammengekommen, um unseren neuen Professor für Digitalisierung und Automatisierung des Verkehrs- und Mobilitätssystems vorzustellen, Herrn Professor Yusak Susilo. Das ist eine ganz großartige Sache und auch immer etwas sehr Schönes für uns hier im Rektorat oder für mich als Rektor, wenn man nach langen Ausschreibungsmodalitäten und Gott sei Dank nicht so komplizierten Verhandlungen dann den neuen Professor und sein Arbeitsgebiet vorstellen darf. Die konkrete Vorstellung der Person wird dann der Departmentleiter Professor Fritz Leisch vornehmen. Ich werde ein paar einleitende Worte zur Professur selber sagen und was das sozusagen im Kontext der BOKU bedeutet. Ich werde das jetzt hauptsächlich in Deutsch machen. I also could speak a few words in English if you want. But I think your German is already excellent, that you understand everything. Maybe you understand already too much. So I think this will work. Yeah? Bevor wir aber mit der Vorstellung der Professur beginnen, wird so eine Veranstaltung auch immer geehrt durch Ehrengäste. Bevor ich diese aber vorstelle, möchte ich vielleicht ein paar organisatorische Dinge sagen. Alle hier im Raum sind getestet. Das heißt, Sie sitzen auch weit genug auseinander, Sie können gerne die Maske abnehmen. Alle jene, die draußen an den Bildschirmen sitzen, sehen jetzt nicht, wie viele Leute hier da sind, aber der Raum ist gut gefüllt, hält aber die Corona-Regeln ein. Also in dem Sinn, glaube ich, kann man sagen, das passt heute so. Ich glaube, es ist einfacher für Sie, wenn Sie gut atmen können. Das Thema ist ja auch spannend, da braucht man dann viel Luft dazu. Ja? So, wir freuen uns heute sehr über eine Reihe von Ehrengästen, die ich ganz gerne begrüßen möchte. Von Seiten der Ministerien freut es uns, dass Herr Magister Christian Drakulic vom Bundesministerium für Klimaschutz, Umwelt und Energie unter uns sein sollte. Ich hoffe, er ist da. Ich habe keine offizielle Meldung bekommen. Na, dann wird er begrüßt in Abwesenheit. Dann freuen wir uns über die Anwesenheit von Herrn Diplom-Ingenieur Roman Kirnbauer vom Bundesministerium ebenfalls für Klimaschutz, Umwelt, Energie und Mobilität. Der ist aber da, ja. Dann freuen wir uns ebenfalls von Seiten des Ministeriums, dass der Herr Florian Suppe da ist, vom gleichen Ministerium, und vom gleichen Ministerium ist ebenfalls da die Frau Diplom-Ingenieurin oder der Herr Diplom-Ingenieur, Entschuldigung, Walter Wasner, aber jetzt die Frau Magdalena Weichselbraun. Jetzt einen kräftigen Applaus bitte, schön, dass Sie zu uns gekommen sind. Von Seiten der Stadt Wien, und das möchte ich hier auch betonen, weil die Stadt Wien auch ein Unterstützer dieser Professur ist, freuen wir uns über die Anwesenheit von Herrn Diplom-Ingenieur Nils Peters und von Gregory Telpak. Ich hoffe, ich habe das richtig ausgesprochen. Sind die Herrschaften da? Sind da. Also schön, dass Sie da sind. Sie kriegen auch einen Applaus, bitte. Von Seiten des Landes Niederösterreich ebenfalls ein treuer Unterstützer auch hier dieser Professur und anderer Vorhaben, die wir im Bereich der Digitalisierung gestartet haben, freuen wir uns über die Anwesenheit von Herrn Diplom-Ingenieur Oliver Greimeister aus dem Büro von Landesrat Ludwig Schleritzko. Schön, dass Sie da sind. Ist er nicht? Ist er da? Ah, da ist er, ja. Dann freuen wir uns natürlich, dass Kollegen, und in dem Fall sind es nur Kollegen, es ist von befreundeten Universitäten hier unter uns sind. Und zwar darf ich begrüßen, und vielleicht behalten wir das dann zusammen für den gemeinsamen Applaus, der Herr Dr. Günther Emberger von der TU Wien. Dann ist hier von der TU Graz der Herr Professor Martin Fellendorf. Dann ist unter uns der Herr Professor Georg Hauger von der TU Wien. Ebenfalls freuen wir uns über die Anwesenheit vom Herrn Universitätsprofessor, Entschuldigung, das ist jetzt eine Frau, da habe ich zuerst was Falsches gesagt, die Frau Universitätsprofessorin Christina Olaveri Monreal von der Johann Kepler Universität in Linz. Ja, und das wäre es schon. Danke, dass Sie alle zu uns gekommen sind und uns die Ehre erweisen. Dankeschön. Von Seiten der BOKU möchte ich vielleicht sehr, sehr herzlich begrüßen den ehemaligen Leiter des Institutes für Verkehrswesen, Herrn Professor Gerd Sammer, der Vorgänger von unserer, also der Vorvorgänger, muss man eigentlich sagen, von unserer Frau Professorin Günemann, die ja auch sehr wesentlich gemeinsam mit ihren Vorgängern hinter dieser Professur stand und dass das überhaupt möglich war. Gerd, schön, dass du da bist. Und wenn es wahr ist, sind auch einige Rektoratskollegen von mir hier. Ich sehe nur keinen, aber ich muss dazu sagen, wir hatten gerade Krisenstabssitzung und ich bin jetzt aus der Krisenstabssitzung rausgekommen, damit ich hier pünktlich bin. Also die Rektoratsmitglieder werden noch kommen. Also ich sehe jetzt keinen von meinen Vizerektoren. Aber wenn ich noch begrüßen möchte, wir haben zuerst ein bisschen geblödelt, und zwar aus einem ganz fachlichen Grund, den Herrn Professor Gronald, Manfred Gronald, weil er auch jemand ist im Bereich der Logistik, der sich mit Digitalisierung beschäftigt und daher auch eine gewisse Nähe zu dem Fachgebiet hat, also stellvertretend für alle anwesenden Universitätsprofessoren der BOKU. Manfred, seist du besonders begrüßt. Ja? So, but now I have the pleasure to introduce a special person. You know, behind a successful man, there is always a successful woman. And it's a great pleasure that today Mrs., I hope I pronounce your first name correctly, Trisna Katikowono Susilo is with us. Yeah, I mean, you know, this is always an interesting task when you negotiate with professors. We also have this question, how does your family cope with this situation? And Professor Susilo was always very clear, my family will come to Vienna and we want to enjoy Vienna, and I see you smile, so you enjoy Vienna. So thanks for supporting your husband. And this is also an obligation for the future, because you should not give up supporting him. Okay, ich möchte jetzt noch ein paar Worte zur Professur oder überhaupt zum Thema Digitalisierung an der BOKU sagen. Wenn man sich die Ausschreibung dieser Stiftungsprofessur, und ich möchte hier ausdrücklich erwähnen, dass hier ja eine Reihe von Unterstützern wie das Land Niederösterreich, dann die Stadt Wien neben den Ministeriumsgeldgebern dahinter standen, dann war die Idee dieser Ausschreibung, und ich lese jetzt hier aus dem Text vor, die Auswirkungen von Digitalisierung und Automatisierung des Verkehrs- und Mobilitätssystems auf Mensch, Gesellschaft, Wirtschaft, Raum und Umwelt in einem nutzerinnenzentrierten Ansatz, das klingt sehr alles kompliziert, systemisch und ganzheitlich zu untersuchen. Ich glaube, auch wenn der Satz jetzt etwas sperrig klingt, was damit gemeint ist, ist wirklich sozusagen die Auswirkungen der digitalen Mobilität auf das Verhalten der Menschen und auch, was bedeutet das für unseren Alltag zu untersuchen. Und ich kann mich erinnern an die ersten Gespräche mit Professor Susilo, der ja aus der Technik eigentlich kommt, aber uns erzählt hat, dass er in Schweden solche Versuche gemacht hat mit automatisierten Fahrzeugen und wie das von den Besucherinnen oder von den Bürgerinnen dort in Stockholm angenommen wurde, war das schon sehr spannend. Was heißt das eigentlich für uns? Das ist schon ein Thema, wir sind sozusagen, jeder redet von Digitalisierung, aber wissen wir eigentlich, was das bedeutet oder wissen wir, was es bedeuten kann? Und ich glaube, dass gerade die Annahme der Digitalisierung auch sehr viel mit der emotionalen Bezug hat. Vertraue ich dem System oder sehe ich das sehr kritisch? Und wir erwarten uns hier auch durch diese Professur, dass wir neben der guten technologischen Nutzung der Digitalisierung auch sozusagen den Menschen mitnehmen. Denn letzten Endes muss ja die Digitalisierung zu einer besseren Problemlösung führen und sollte ja nicht Selbstzweck sein. Das macht ja keinen Sinn. Und so gesehen haben wir große Hoffnungen und wie ich auch höre, haben Sie ja einige sehr interessante Projekte gestartet. Und ich glaube, es war auch hier wichtig, dass wir die nötigen Partner haben, die so quasi die Prototyp-Implementierung ermöglichen. Es ist sozusagen auch wichtig, dass Herr Susilo hat im Zuge der Berufungsverhandlungen haben wir auch so eine kleine Roadmap festgelegt, wo wir hinkommen wollen. Und er hat das sehr schön dargestellt mit sozusagen einem, er hat es vielleicht ein bisschen anders genannt, als ich es jetzt sage, so eine Art Stakeholder Board, wo es also diese Rückkoppelungen gibt, aber auch quasi die Anbindung an andere Systeme. Also wenn ich jetzt heute hier den Kollegen begrüße vom vom Büro des Landesrats Schleritzko, dann weiß ich, dass das Land Niederösterreich zum Beispiel sehr interessiert daran ist, wie man Nahverkehr unterbinden kann und wie man sozusagen auch Digitalisierung oder Automatisierung im Verkehrswesen dazu nutzen kann, dass wir eben weniger fahren, dass wir damit weniger CO2 ausstoßen. Also Sie kommen dann implizit immer wieder dorthin, ein gemeinsames Fahren, eine clevere digitale Mobilität hat auch was mit Klimaschutz zu tun. Diese Professur muss man aber auch in einem breiteren Kontext sehen, wie wir hier vor jetzt ist schon fast 4 Jahre hier, wie wir in das Rektoratsamt kamen, da war diese Professur schon am Weg, aber wir haben dann seit damals auch weitere Digitalisierungsschritte gefasst. Also wir haben derzeit eine Digitalisierungsprofessur ausgeschrieben im Bereich der Land- und Forstwirtschaft. Da erwarten wir in Kürze, dass wir mit den Berufungsverhandlungen beginnen können. Also Digitalisierung in der Land- und Forstwirtschaft. Wir haben auch mit Unterstützung des Landes Niederösterreichs eine sogenannte Digi-Doc-School etabliert, also wo wir ja, es könnten natürlich immer mehr sein, aber ich glaube jetzt insgesamt 6 oder 7 Dissertanten finanzieren. Dabei ist die TU Wien, die Veterinärmedizinische Universität und die BOKU. Wir haben sozusagen einen Ort, die Idee war, so einen Ort Digitalisierungscluster zu schaffen, wo man sozusagen zwar verschiedene Professuren hat in verschiedenen Anwendungsfällen, aber gewisse methodische Dinge, und das wäre dann auch meine Bitte an den Professor Susilo, wenn wir den neuen Professor im Bereich der Land- und Forstwirtschaft haben, dass ihr euch sozusagen methodisch auch austauscht. Denn natürlich ist es jetzt in anderen Bereichen nicht so wichtig, dass man alle Menschen mitnimmt, weil man ja nur mit Spezialisten zu tun hat. Aber bestimmte methodische Überlegungen, denke ich, werden vielleicht in allen Bereichen ähnlich sein, aber ich bin jetzt kein Digitalisierungsexperte. Letzten Endes glaube ich, und ich blicke hier ganz gezielt in die Richtung der Frau Professor Kühnemann, ist sozusagen Mobilität oder Smart Mobility auch eine Frage des Klimaschutzes und der Reduzierung des CO2-Ausstoßes. Und es wird nicht dabei bleiben, dass wir halt sagen, wir sind gute Menschen und fahren halt statt mit Dieselautos, mit Elektroautos. Das ist zwar schön, wenn wir das tun, aber ich glaube, es geht auch darum, wie können wir die Mobilitätsverhalten generell verändern. Und da wird, glaube ich, die Professur, die Professor Susilo hier innehat, ein wichtiger Baustein sein, Näheres zu lernen. Natürlich auch mit der Logistik. Aber gut, jetzt darf er mal zuerst seine Digitalisierung ausprobieren. Ja? In diesem Sinne, glaube ich, ist es wichtig zu verstehen, dass wir als BOKU, als Universität, die sich eben der Nachhaltigkeit verschrieben hat, es hier nicht nur geht, über diese Dinge zu reden, sondern auch Technologien zu fördern, die dann am Ende des Tages dazu einen Beitrag leisten. Und das ist natürlich ein langer Weg, braucht auch einen langen Atem. Und ich möchte auch hier zum Schluss sagen, braucht aber auch Finanziers, die diese Vision sehen. Und so sind wir sehr dankbar über die Geldgeber, dass die das ermöglicht haben. Denn Forschung hat ja so etwas Unangenehmes an sich, man weiß ja nicht genau, was rauskommt. Man muss einmal anfangen und der Wahrheit einen Schritt näher kommen. Und wenn man dann ein Ergebnis hat, dann werden vielleicht einige Ergebnisse nicht funktionieren. Das ist, jeder von uns kennt das und man hat oft umsonst gearbeitet. Aber es gibt dann wieder Dinge, die dann wirklich, wo man sagt, da wäre ich jetzt nicht draufgekommen, wenn ich das nicht gemacht habe. Und genau das ist sozusagen die Hoffnung in Sie, lieber Professor Susilo, dass Sie vielleicht das eine oder andere Failure haben, aber dass Sie dann sagen, so müssen wir es machen und dann sind wir erfolgreich und das darf ich Ihnen bereits jetzt von ganzem Herzen wünschen. Ich muss auch sagen, es war sehr angenehm, mit Ihnen die Verhandlungen zu führen, war sehr konstruktiv und auch sehr spannend für mich als Nicht-Digitalisierungsmensch oder Mobilitätsforscher. Und in diesem Sinne würde ich jetzt gerne überleiten zu Professor Fritz Leisch, dem Departmentleiter, dass er Professor Susilo als Person und seinen Werdegang kurz vorstellt. Herzlichen Dank.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hubert, for introducing the professorship. We now deal with the person. He's a global player in the sense that he has a long journey behind him. He did his master thesis or master course already in transport engineering in Indonesia, moved then to Japan to do his PhD, had postdoc positions in the Netherlands and the UK, then went on to Sweden. In Sweden, he did his habilitation in transport policies, got an associate professor, and finally full professor in 2018, if I remember correctly. And now in 2019, he moved to Vienna And he has numerous publications in high-level journals. And now I give the floor over to you. And we're looking forward to your Antrittsvorlesung.
Thank you very much, Rector Hasenauer, and thank you very much, Professor Leisch. Thank you very much for coming, all the colleagues from the ministry and also professors from different places and also all family and friends in the Institute. Let me just drink this first. So this is actually my second year in Vienna, and it takes a while to actually get this Antrittsvorlesung, thanks to COVID. Nevertheless, as Professor Hasenauer said, we actually really enjoy our every bit in Vienna. Well, of course, the lockdown. And it's actually we're really pleased that we actually have this lecture. And my lecture title would be The Future of Transport, the Dance Between People and Technology. So the reasons why I actually take this title is when the rector actually contacted me, I wasn't quite sure what I'm going to talk, but then I couldn't really find a better term in describing the interactions between people and technology than a dance. At least that's just keep ringing in my head. And it's quite scary simply because we are actually in Vienna and I cannot dance. That's actually a very, very bad start. But then what really interesting, at least about me, my own experience learning dance is that it's some things that we always keep trying. We will always make a mistake. There will be some kind of move that probably not for you. And then somehow then we also kind of try to be express ourselves in a different way, and then we try again and again, up to a certain point, then realize, okay, yes, this is for me. Or probably this is not for me. But that's pretty much a journey. And this is what I would like to actually kind of describe on how we're actually going to interact with our technology. In particular, when we actually talk about transport, and also about the human needs. Speaking about transport, it's quite intimidating, especially if you're actually part of BOKU, University of Life. Everybody speaks science, and we talk about transport applied. But then the thing is, many people don't really realize how important transport is, especially now we actually talk about reducing carbon emissions. And many people, basically transport is pretty much everywhere, pretty much in every aspect of our life, from just bringing goods from the raw materials through productions, from the productions to your store, and then from your store basically to your home. And we actually need also to transport to go to work. So then we actually have money, then actually we go to store and buy something, etc., etc., etc. And once we actually stop the transport, then basically the whole economy will pretty much collapse. And it's also, that's why it's actually very important if we actually want, for example, address the UN SDG, then transport is pretty much in the heart of it. Yes, it's actually start from if you really want to have a sustainable citizen communities, if you want to reduce inequalities, if you want to have sustainable consumptions and productions, then transport is pretty much in the heart of it. Now, what also problematic with transport, at least the way we do it now, is if you actually have a look on the graphs. So now everybody talk about this COP26, carbon, carbon, carbon. So then when you actually have a look between 1990 to 2018, and this is pretty, I extract this from this VRI websites from EU27. Transport used to be just 14% for all the gas emissions. And then it was number 3. And whilst everything is actually going down, including electricity, transport is actually increased, almost double. So you actually put together between agriculture and manufacturing, all these gas emissions that come from agriculture and manufacturing together, that's pretty much how transport is producing its gas emissions. And if you just have a look on the carbon, that's actually worse. So if you actually just look on carbon, basically transport responsible for about 30%. So, and passenger transport is pretty much about 15% of the carbon emissions. That's pretty much, as the title, as bombastic as it is, transport could burn the EU entire carbon budget, as it is. So that's why when the technology come up, especially like automation and digitalization, everybody just like excited, great, finally we can have our cake and eat it. Because in the past, usually if to reduce carbon, we actually have to do this kind of transport demand management. We try to restrain people to travel further, either by, expanding supply, or basically try to encourage people to walking or cycling more, or probably try to give incentive for people to use more public transport, or just doing what we do in Stockholm, for example, just impose congestion charge. So the more you actually travel or you pass a certain boundary, then you actually have to pay. Or like in Singapore, in the future, the congestion charge would be by kilometer. So the more you drive, the more you pay. Then usually that's becoming less popular politically. And that's why when this technology roll out, we can actually have these automations in vehicles or automations in freight, or we can also have this kind of sharings, all connected, basically, and everybody kind of saying, yes, this will actually improve road safety, it will actually reduce emissions, it will actually boost the productivity, etc., hooray. What not to like? Then at the same time, what really governments really like is that all these things have a big promise. So if you actually can monetize from these digitalizations and also automations, then this would be the future of economy. This will actually worth billions. So that's why both for passengers and also for the freight transport. And I myself, because now I'm sitting in an advisory board for a World Bank project that analyzes ride sharing in Asia, it's called Gojek. It's actually, there is some evidence of it. For example, this is a story of ride-hailing service, which is in 2010, it was just 20 motorbikes. Now, they're actually being used by hundreds of millions of people. And then it's actually have a gross turnover values of about 22 billion just in 2020, which is 10 years since it was grown. And what really interesting is that with such approach, with all this ride-hailing and platform, you actually can provide beyond mobility service. So there's still kind of ride sourcing, there's also delivery sourcing, but then you can also accredit services, you can also a movie purchasing, or you can also even consulting with the doctor with all these super apps. And this is not actually the only one. You can also have a similar super apps in Korea, you can also comparable super apps also in China, etc. And in transport itself, such excitement is actually have been kind of lead explosions. I guess the colleagues from Research Council is quite familiar with it. It's kind of, we build a lot of living labs just to see how it actually works, whether it can actually do what it's supposed to do. So I just took one of the two friends company that quite popular, being used. One is actually EasyMile, the other one is Nivea. And you can actually see how many actually living lab that has been trial. This is just the figures back in January 2020. So it's quite a lot of excitement on this, of course, different people have a different approach. For example, like the Japanese, they try to utilize the existing bus, while the Finns, they try to actually create a pod that can survive in minus 30 degrees. So this is just a number that actually a colleague from Austria Tech has been collecting recently, kind of publishing early this year on kind of shows how many kind of living labs in this automated bus has been and across countries. And this is how many kilometers has been clocked by all these autonomous car for different companies, from Waymo, General Motors, from Volvo, BMW, etc., etc. From industrial point of view, if I talk people, for example, from Ericsson, for them, this is like duh. This is pretty much like a normal development of the technology. So if you are as old as me, you probably lived the age where there was no internet. Then after that, you actually have kind of plug in a wait like that. Then after that, you kind of go to this 2G kind of mobile phone that you can actually literally can kill people with it. It's kind of very heavy. At the time, I work in a consultant, and my boss really wanted me to carry it. Like, no way in a million years, actually, I carry that because it's slightly as big as a brick. But then, at the time, at least we can actually call, and then we can actually start to play a warm, and then I start to have a color. And then after that, then it's actually, the internet actually start to actually connect it, and then we can actually start to actually see the movie. So I think first time I see the mobile phone can actually play a movie when I was in Japan in the beginning of 2000. I think the product was not available in the rest of the world until 2005, 2006, when the iPhone actually, not iPhone, at the time it's called iTouch. It's not even iPhone. Before 2008 or 2007, there was no iPhone that we know now. So then basically with the development in the past where we can just basically take a picture, now we actually can tag, and then we can also start to actually see the movie. And then in the past, it takes ages just to see the short movie. I feel very powerful with this 1 megabyte of hard disk. Now with just 1 gig, it's just gone within seconds. So that's how much actually, without realizing, we actually consume more and more kind of these connections. But then at the same time, the people from IT already see that this is what you could do, actually. This is what actually our visions. It's not that we actually need 5G with our existing needs. They always think about can we sell more in the future? What would be people's needs in the future? And then in doing that, then what do we need? Oh, we need actually 5G. Let's do that. And then, of course, then we will actually have more again and again in the future. Now, once everything looks perfect, nothing can actually be taken as granted, especially when you actually deploy a technology. The reasons why I can say this is I will take from 2 different experience that I had. So the first one, I was kind of lucky enough to be kind of involved in one of the world's first deployment of automated bus in Sweden back in 2018, then also with the implementations of Neighbourhood Telecommuting Centre. The idea of me kind of showing this is to show that although logically it should work, it's probably not that easy, or it's not that straightforward. Start with this case. So operating automated bus as a fully integrated public transport mode. So at a time when we implement this, it of course, the shuttle already around for a while. But then those shuttle, usually you just put in a closed routes, like a merry-go-round, like in this Pakistan. And then you don't really use as a real transport mode. And this is our ambitions at the time back in Sweden. So we actually have 2 kind of steps. So the first project is that we just want to put the shuttles as it is, without sandbox. The problem with playing with sandbox policy is that you can put anything, you can make it work, but then when you put it in a real world, it would not work. So that's why we actually put in without sandbox, and that's why it took us, at first, it's almost 2 years just to finish all the paperwork. At a time, EasyMile doesn't really have kind of fulfill all these European Union ISO. So we actually have to look what is actually legal requirement to put this in just regular roads in Sweden and in EU roads. And then once it actually works, technically it's actually fine until you actually realize that it's not that the shuttle cannot really run really fast. Well, it can actually run up to 40 kilometers per hour, but then what happened with the Sweden is that we actually have a lot of this kind of hump, and then the Leiter was designed in a very flat routes. And then suddenly, when you actually have hump, then the shuttle think that, oops, I'm gonna actually hit a wall. There you go. Then we realized, okay, oops, it's not gonna work. But then after that, soon the manufacturer learned, and they actually sent us a new versions of it. And then, there you go, then we move to the next one, where we actually deploy the vehicles, and it's still operating until now. So it's October 2018, so now November 2021, so it's already more than 3 years. So basically, we actually have about 4 or 6 units working as a public transport integrated. You actually have to pay with a headway of 10 minutes. So why they actually do this? The thing is, at least for the operators, so this is actually operated by the operator. It's not really government initiative, because the operator really want to actually be able to operate this without really sandbox. But then at the same time, from the Stockholm city point of view, they really want to actually solve the first and last mile problem. So they never really thought or planned to put this in the RTL route. No, the RTL route is good. You actually have these bendy buses. What's the English word of the bendy buses? Bendy buses is the English word. Articulated buses. So the long articulated buses. And the headway is pretty much every 5-10 minutes. That's actually excellent arterial routes for public transport. So that's pretty much the reasons why actually they do this. Now, when you actually put this, at first that, everybody should be like it. Especially when we actually start in Kista. Kista is pretty much Silicon Valley of Sweden. So the head of Google, Ericsson's, etc. actually there, exactly in front of the routes that we pass. So everybody should get excited about it. But that's actually not the case. And the one that actually really want or wish to actually use the bus is actually either the tech-savvy people or the people who always try strange things like personal mobility unit or pensioners. And the one that doesn't really want to use it is basically a regular public transport users or pedestrians or business owners, which kind of strange. And then when we actually develop much more complex models, so then you can actually know why they actually answer that, those pensioners actually said that, well, yeah, we actually want to do this because we thought that this is going to be cheaper than regular public transport, which is not. So this is actually based on the false perceptions. And the other thing is that those public transport users, they will already say that, okay, this is really bad comfort. It's also the frequency is also not as good as my existing public transport, so I will not actually using it. So this actually helps us to actually understand what we actually can do to design the next service. And this is the approach that we have in the red one. So if I could just, So this is the first one in Kista, and the second one is in Barkarby, the red one. So in Barkarby, we actually start to because based on this experiment, we actually decided we should probably do a little bit of design thinking in deploying our service. So we actually evaluate our service every year. So once you actually deploy, whether we actually have done the service well and how actually people reactions. So then we can actually adjust the service better. So given this, then we actually do some longitudinal service as well at the same time. So then we can also start to understand what makes people actually adopt this technology in a longer term. So it's not really how it looks, but then there are 3 points that actually make people jump from non-adopter to an adopter of this technology. So the first one is they think that it's actually safe, of course. The second one is basically if they don't actually have car alternative, which is fine. At least in Sweden, there's not so many people have car, at least in Stockholm, it's quite limited. The third one is the ability to actually handle disappointment. The problem is that, especially when you actually talk with technology, people actually tend to have these amazing expectations. I grew up with this Knight Rider, if you know, this David Hasselhoff, where actually the vehicles can save me and can talk with me. And people, actually some people, those kind of images actually still stuck in our head. And then when you actually have these automated vehicles, like why it's like just a shuttle, move slowly, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't talk to me. So this is kind of the things that make people say, okay, so this is not what I dream of, then I left. And so this is kind of really important in particular because when you actually then have to deliver a new technology, then you actually have to set a certain level of expectations. Of course, some people, they actually try to exaggerate the ability of it, and that's actually the problems with it. Now, when we actually further explore the users and try to say, okay, in what circumstances or what actually, how different your expectations and your usage patterns if you actually use automated bus and also if you actually use regular bus. What we found, for example, is that the automated bus, probably also because of these expectations of the technology, they're actually much more sensitive with the drop of level of service. So with exactly the same level of delay, if you probably 5 minutes delay, if you're just waiting for an articulated bus, probably, okay, it's a public transport. But then if you're actually waiting for an automated bus and 5 minutes delay, then you can actually start to grumbling. So this kind of showing that if you actually run this in economic models, it's probably not really that makes sense. But then this is why we need to actually understand the users and the humans that actually use this one, because those people actually come with some expectations that influence the decisions. Just a very quick overview, since what we actually have done, another thing is that, of course, we also work with the operators. For example, originally the operators have a plan to do this, let me just show this, my laser pointer, kind of, well, this is the first step, and this is the second step, and this is the third step. And then, given the feedback from the first year evaluations, that we realized that no, the people are really want to actually have a faster bus that have this and that. So that's we actually run a little bit of simulations just to actually know which route and what kind of improvement that they actually should do. So this kind of design thinking, somehow it works, and this is what actually makes the service actually sustain over time. So the idea is that what I'm trying to say is, the message of this is that although the technology indicate like the right directions. For example, this is what DigiBus Austria had. And this is our master students with me and Dr. Clemens is actually supervised. We're actually able to get data from Salzburg Research for the real data that how this automated bus has been formed in the hilly mountain in Salzburg. And in terms of energy consumptions, I think it's pretty cool. So combined with all these combustion engines that we have. That said, the trick is that how then we actually have this tool can we actually use to actually fulfill our purpose, with kind of showing that this is not solely about the technical problems, but then also the needs to understand the user. So this is one example. Another example that I got is for digitalizations. So one of the blessings of being connected is that you can actually do anything, anywhere. Well, you can basically working, you can actually watching TV anywhere as long as you're actually connected. And this is another initiative that we actually try to do. It's not, we call it a Neighbourhood Telecommuting Centre. It's not co-working location. Co-working location is basically the one that you actually can go. You pay per hour or you pay per month, and you have a meeting with your friends close to the station, and there you go. This one is that initiative that we work with the local authorities, not the city authorities, but the regional authorities. so that in the area where they have a lot of commuters, they actually provide a suburbs office, let's put it like that, that basically shared. So in this time, we actually shared between Ericsson's and KTH and others, so we actually shared one building in the suburbs. The idea is that we really want to, if you actually have that alternative working place, and we link this with all these green alternatives, travel modes, everything would be beautiful. So this is just to show the place where we're aiming. So we're looking for a place where 70% are actually commuting, have quite a lot of cars. There's some they have bicycles, but the public transport is not that great. And the place is pretty much looks like that. And they actually have to commute between 30 to 40 minutes one way. So it's 1.5 hours round trips. So that's pretty much the markets that we try to capture and make them, as the Dutch says, working, living, and playing in the same place. Then when we actually have a look, so we actually have an interview, we actually have a travel diaries, what we found is that those initiatives, although they don't actually commute, it doesn't actually reduce the use of the car, for the sake that, yes, they actually go to this place, but then they also have other trip chaining. So actually, they actually have to do the school runs for their daughters. So at the end, they still use a car. And what really also a bit disappointing is that, well, many of those people are actually used to work at home. So now if we actually provide them alternative office to work further from their office, just work locally, first we actually have to heat up this building. So that's actually the cost. And then, which is basically is not something that we should actually spend if they're staying at home, just working from home. And it's actually this kind of alternatives only make sense if they actually regularly commute every single day. Otherwise, from energy impact, it is not a saving at all. So that's pretty much shows on how much kind of a good intentions, kind of living labs and innovations that we started, but then it didn't really materialize well simply because humans just decided something else. Now, if you actually talk about automation and digitalizations, theoretically, fundamentally, what would change? So it's basically, from my point of view, there's one thing, which is it will break the boundary of time-space prism. So if you come from urban geography, you're probably familiar with this concept. The idea is that first, we're just not Superman. Basically, we are a very limited human being. Our movement over time and space is limited on the resources that we have. So for example, if you have half an hour from now, have a half an hour, 30 minutes break, and then you have to walk. You probably can only walk, 15 minutes, and you actually go back. So that's pretty much 1 kilometer. But then if you actually have a motorcycle, you probably can travel 5 kilometers. If you have, a personal jet that already within this half an hour, you probably can reach, 100 kilometers. But that's pretty much the physical boundary that actually bound us in space and time. Now, then at the same time, that's called capacity constraint. The other constraint that we have is what we call coupling constraint. Means that, I have a family, and then usually if I don't go home by 7, my wife already start calling me. So basically then, I should actually be at home at 7. So that's that's my time-space prism. So anything after 7, although it's a very attractive location, and I would really want to be there, no, that is off the choice set for me. So that's what we call coupling constraint. And of course, the authority constraint is that the constraints that we actually been given by the government, like shopping places. So now we probably can still do shopping until about 8 o'clock. But then at weekend, especially on Sunday, those stores are closed. Means, although you really, really live, next to really, really wonderful villa, if it's closed, it's closed. the option is not for you. And this is what digitalizations and automation is actually breaking all this kind of constraint. Means, I don't know, after this, I can just go to MediaMarkt, I order something, by tomorrow, although it's already 12 o'clock midnight, by tomorrow morning, 8 in the morning, there will be somebody knocking my door, and here you go, this is what you bought last night. So, and this will actually make the whole activity and also everything that our patterns would actually change a lot, and so as our time use allocation a lot, it changed a lot. And at the same time, those ability for us to actually keep connecting and do multitasking then start to actually raise the questions of then what is the value of our time, in the sense that in the past, yes, even that I have to go to BOKU because I actually have to do this for lesson, so I cannot actually probably do this online. It would be nice to do it physical. So then, but then at the same time, so then I actually have to spend some costs for me to actually travel. But then in my travel, it's probably not a loss because during my travel, I actually check my email. So it's kind of count as working. So it's not really entirely loss. It probably value some things that not as great as I just sit and work 100%, but then it is not just a negative value of time. And all of this multitasking and also the ability to always move over time and space is actually raise questions about the implications to value of allocations and accessibility. So in the past, I need to go to a supermarket, to Now Centrum, Sud City, or whatever to do a particular thing. Now I don't have to. So then it's also kind of influence where I can actually live. So in the past, or at least when I was in Japan, I really, really liked to live next to the stations. This transit-oriented development of Japanese is great. Next to the stations, you have this 20, 30 stories building where you can find anything that you can think of in this world. But then, probably now I don't need living there because it's noisy, but I can, with all this automation and digitalization, I can still have all these things through internet. And furthermore, in the past, for example, I need to actually plan very well my trips. For example, I drive from here. I cannot, for example, if I want to go to Berlin, I cannot just go one trip. I need to stop somewhere, especially if I already start quite late. I need to sleep. But if I have an automated vehicles, I can just sleep in my car. I can take shower in my car. I can watch TV in my car. My life is becoming my car. Imagining that I have this Air Force One, kind of, but like in the shuttle. But then you can then imagine the whole pillars that structures the way we plan all this Raum, this space just collapse. It's simply because what's the meaning of physical accessibility then? If everybody can just sit in the car and just tell wherever the car will go, I don't really care about the rest of the world. I live in my own cocoon. So I don't really mind, commute 3 hours as long as I can sleep, right? Because I sleep. So that's pretty much some things that what technology can actually do in influence people's life. This is just talking about the travel in term of straightforward, just a choice modeling. At least this is the things that what the automations can actually do. Not only about the driver, but then also influence our mode choice, it influence our route choice, it also influence on how much we're actually willing to spend in travel. That said, if we just think carefully, and I really like this project, it's called Mantra, it's basically tried to map how things actually relate. So although when I actually said that, yeah, this will actually cost that, this actually cost that, actually those things would just happen, or those benefits or all this wonderful stuff would just happen if the whole thing is clicked together. Once there's one thing that doesn't really click, then all the benefit not actually materialize. And again, this is also where it's very important to understand our users and also understand the system that actually support all these automations. For example, automations would actually say that yes, it will actually encourage safety because we can forget about these clumsy drivers who keep making mistakes. But so in that sense, we will have a safer look environment. But then at the same time, machine does make a mistake. So you can actually hear that how much a particular brand of car, when they actually just this auto cruising just being launched, they actually hit a white color truck simply because the LiDAR doesn't really function as it should. At the same time, yes, basically, in one way, many people said that these automations actually can actually reduce energy use because the use of car will be sharing, so then the resources would be basically more better use. But then at the same time, as I said, I don't mind to travel further. I can just sleep, 3 hours, and then voila, I will arrive in my villa somewhere in Alpen mountain, hopefully, eventually. So that's pretty much then what's then the good thing for the environment, because yes, there would be sharing car, so that would be a saving, but then I will travel 1,000 longer than I was, which probably not a saving. So we can actually go on and on about this, but then basically this just highlight on the needs of much deeper and more holistic impact analysis of the technology, and also from understanding from the user needs and the adoption patterns and adaptations, to also the plausible unintended impact of technologies. And this is why what our demos is about. So basically, as Mr. Hassanauer, Director Hassanauer already said, we actually have a number of missions. We actually try to, first, although yes, whilst in one hand we try to promote and evaluate the impact of new solutions, we also need to seek in what circumstances these solutions would actually works. And then what would be the impact of these solutions that probably nobody think about. And at least I hope also when we actually do this exercise, it's kind of put a break a little bit and help us to think, is this what we really need? Because, it's very interesting to seduce, or it's very nice to be seduced by all this technology. I'm an engineer, I love my technology. That said, as we saw that technology can actually also produce things that we may actually not expect it. To be able to actually do so, kind of analyzing the user needs and to be aware of few things, there are few things that actually come with this new advancement of technology. So the first one is that we actually have a new type of data. So in the past, we tend to actually, like in transport, we do this traffic count. We actually do this kind of car following. We actually do this kind of observation, etc. But now we actually have a new type of data, ubiquitous data. And then at the same time, with this type of data and also with much more detailed service, much more connective and much more responsive service, then we also need a new type of model. And the third one is that there are things that later on I'll show that kind of analysis that were not needed in the past, but then because now we actually have this technology, then we actually have to do it. So if we just start with the data, so what's the difference? First, the data is way more. So in the past, when I was consultant, I can use Excel. Then I put it in a text and run it in ME2 or whatever, and there you go. But then, now with mobile phone data, that is something else. And the other thing is that it's not just one thing. So this is a work that we have done in the past. So we created an open source mobile phone data collector called Meili. It has been implemented in at least 4 or 5 cities around the world. It's an open source, so everybody can actually use it. Now, what's really interesting about this process is that which one is the transport data? It's basically just a coordinate and timestamp at this stage. Then you actually show it to the users, and the user correcting it. Is that already transport data? Then you actually run machine learning, try to infer it. Is that the transport data? And then after you actually run machine learning and you got this pattern, should we stop there? Or should we actually run another machine learning to make it great, to make it really accurate? So then are we actually interfering with our data? So that's kind of thinking that in the past it's very easy. You go to the field, you count how many traffic, there you go. That's your transport data. You don't mess with it. Now, the data is actually becoming a process. So from the acquisitions, then from you extracting, then you actually try to integrate it, try to make a sense of it, you're visualizing it, then you trained it, then you interpret it, and so on and so on. So the question is that, so where is transport data? And then the other thing is that once you actually do this is another thing that we actually try. So we actually make this open source again, a platform with a smartwatch. So after we actually do these active data collections, we do passive data collection with smartwatch. We just want to know the relationship between individual movement over space with their heart rates and the level of stress. When we're actually creating this, the idea is that we work with the hospital, basically for the people with dementia, because in Sweden, for people with dementia, we just put on care, observe, or inside the house, simply because now and then they get this allotment where they don't really know where they are. They just walk for quite a long time, and then when they realize they're already in the middle of somewhere that they don't really know. So we actually start this kind of initiative, and then we actually end up with some kind of problems like interpreting the data. Yes, in one sense, the data is very rich. I can track where the person goes, but then I cannot really know what's the cause of it. So this is pretty much the heart rate from 64 to 125. And then you probably would thought that in this stage, this person is actually go up because, it's becoming more and more red. Actually not. This is actually go down. And the street is very nice. The problem why the heart beating is up is because when he stopped in here, his ex-girlfriend is calling. So when he actually go home, he was really pissed. So that's actually the reasons why the heartbeats actually increase. And this is pretty much if it just kind of throw the whole intentions of the research out the window, because we cannot actually get the context. And why I'm actually mentioning this is because at least in transport, one of the most precious data that we have is odometrics. And with odometrics, basically, if you don't know, it's to describe, basically we split the city into zones, and this is from and to, so from which zone to which zone. So you can imagine like from District 1 to District 1, District 1 to District 2, District 1 to District 3, and so on. And the problem is that for some zones, like you can imagine some routes in Alpen, we don't actually have much observations. Means you actually have blue. Now, if you want to project in the future, you just multiply those numbers with 3 or 4, just like the simple one. If you actually get 0, it will stay 0. So irrespective, you can say that the traffic has been increased 1 million times. If it starts 0, then 0 multiplied by 1 million, that's 0. And that's actually a problem. And that's where the big data, all this tower data, telecommunication data is interesting, because then you can actually fill all those blue, and you can actually get more data. But then the problem is, yes, you actually can get the right quantity. You can also get a lot of data that you actually like, but you don't actually have the context. Means you then actually have problems to use those data for predictions. Because the way we, at least in more traditional modeling approach, basically those data attached to a context. Those data belong to a man, 40 years old, and I don't know, medium income. So that when you want to actually change something, give an incentive or whatever, then you can actually see, well, this type of sociodemographic group would actually travel 2 times more. This type of sociodemographic group in the future would basically do less trips. If you actually just have numbers without context, you cannot actually do that. So this is actually also the problems, kind of, but then also the opportunity. How then we can actually improve our model, so then we can actually develop these data fusions or kind of mix between statistical modeling that we have with a big data approach that we have. Can we actually put something together so then we can actually, use something rather than instead of depending on the metrics that we have on the top. Now, when we talk about the model itself, the model that we have, I kind of take an extreme. There is some variations in between. But then one of the models that, basic models that we have is something that we call 4-step modeling. It's actually created in 1950s. Basically, it was to estimate people regional trips for this highway demand at the time. So the idea is that, well, based on the sociodemographic of the place, you estimate how many people trips. Given that your sociodemographic, well, you are a professor, you actually have this kind of household structure. On this day, you probably do 3 trips or 4 trips, etc. Then basically you classify people based on the zones. So there's a let's put zone as a district: District 1, District 2, District 3, District 4, District 5. Now then, so you actually have, I don't know, 10 professors in District 1, 100 professors in District 9, 500 professors in District, I don't know, 18, etc. Then based on this multiplication factor, then you know how many trips will be made. Then after that, then you distribute the trips, where this professor goes. And then it's actually, we use what we call gravity model. So the bigger attraction is, the more people going there. Like, the more attractive Donau Centrum is, compared with just a corner shops, the more you're actually going there. Then after that, once you actually know, well, there will be 500 professors travel from District 18 to District 22, and then probably half of them will just drive. And then 30% of them will use public transport. Then after that, when for this, the one that drive, 150, where this kind of, they actually choose, which routes they actually choose. So this is pretty much the basic transport modeling. Now, the problem is that with those modeling is you cannot really tell what happened inside. And that start to create problems, because when you talk about District 9 or District 22, that's a huge area. And when you want to know, let's say, walking or cycling, it's somewhere that actually in between. Means anything that doesn't really cross the zone doesn't really happen. And it's actually create problem, because when you want to plan this kind of cycling routes, or you just want to have this mobility hub that pretty much first and last mile, this is not something that we can do. And that's why we actually have, or we kind of, in Davemos, in our groups, in our institute, we try to initiate it to actually use an agent-based model. So instead of we actually have this zone-based analysis, we actually have this agent-based analysis. So we can actually simulate where these people actually live, where they actually go on the given time. So then with this, and then with also this connectivity and all these different cycling routes, tram routes, walking routes, then you can actually start to simulate pedestrians and also cyclists as well, and where they actually goes in a different time of the day in the different locations of the city. Then you can actually start to actually analyze the demand in a much more accurate way. Then you can actually start to analyze whether your investment in micromobility is actually makes sense. Now, if you actually start to talk with micromobility, another thing that also starts to occur is that how people actually interact. So in the past, it's just us pedestrians. Then if you dare jump to this roadway, you're dead, pretty much like that. So stay in the pedestrian path. But then the problem is that in this pedestrian path now, my wife knows that sometimes I just take a picture because sometimes they just put e-scooters in the middle of it. I thought it's hilarious, but that's also annoying. But then this is also exactly how we are now actually compete in our limited road space with all these new travel modes. And this is what we actually try to do. So to actually understand that how actually people interact with the different road users, of course, if you're lucky, you can see from the CCTV if there is a road rage. But you don't want to have that, right? So then that's why we actually developed this virtual reality environments where you can actually have a look on how actually people react in the different environment and whether they can actually interact nicely, in what circumstances they're actually willing to actually share the road space. And then the other thing also, during the explorations, you can also attach this EEG and see how a different level of design would actually impose stress to actually the users. So this is some things that we actually have been started. So the idea is that in the future, there will be more modes, travel modes, a different type of modes. Now, the question is how then we can actually deal with this, in what kind of design of shared space, if the city like to have more shared space, do they actually have to provide colors on the shared space or not? And then the way we also do this is we also kind of linking to micro-simulation software like a FreeSip. So then we can also kind of generalize the impact in a much wider network, so then we can actually quantify what would be the impact, the wider impact of such interactions. Another thing that I said was not really kind of thought or analyzed that actually happened before automations is basically remote driving. So this is a calculations that we made basically together with Scania. What would be the benefit of automated trucks? So there's a different class of trucks, different size of trucks. And then those trucks would actually make sense, in particular economically, if you get rid of basically the drivers. So from conventional scenarios that we had, you can, all this automated saving, 90% come from make the driver disappear. So the driver just kind of wait and do in the urban area or somewhere where they actually just be picked up, and in the middle, they just move automatically. Now, the question is, once you actually put these automated vehicles on the roads, who is responsible for it? Who should actually take over when things gone wrong? And it's all not only truck, but also for the bus or for automated bus or automated car. And this is where we actually start this research, which is a few days ago, just being picked up also by Enright. Basically, we start to actually test how good actually people driving when they're actually driving manually, and then when they actually drive virtually of exactly the same car. Basically, what we ask them is just to solve a basic driving license requirement. Can you actually park? Can you actually make this turn? Can you actually do this as good as? Whilst at the same time, we also kind of put this kind of brain reading, so then you can actually see how stressed they are. Because by the end of the day, this is also kind of influence how many persons can handle X number of trucks. Can a person handle 20 trucks at the same time? Or can persons handle 100 trucks at the same time? Or can a person handle, I don't know, 2,000 trucks at the same time? Where would be the limit? And this is the reasons why we actually do this, this kind of research. So basically, what we're trying to see in here is that, yes, automations and digitalization is great, it's full of promises, but then it is actually beyond traveling. There are many things actually come with it. And at least, I hope you agree with me that technology is just a tool. It's pretty much like a fork, or it's like a shovels, or anything that we would like to do whatever we would like to do. And I hope you also agree that not every innovation is actually great. To be able to actually say that, we actually need to understand what we're actually dealing with. So we shouldn't actually treat that as a black box. Neither we actually have to treat this as a black magic. So I tend to actually tell this to my students if they are really afraid of modeling. Like, don't be afraid, because you have to do it. At least you need to understand how it works. And one of the common pitfalls is that we try to fit our society to this technology. We try to see, how can I make this technology being accepted by everybody? Instead of, how then use this technology to help the society? Which sounds similar, but then there's a huge different principles underlying it. So again, just back to the dance. In doing this, when you really want to actually grab it, you actually want to understand it, it's like learning how to dance. There would be a lot of hesitation. It's a new method. Come on, I'm 40 years old. I'm done with my math. I don't really want to study anything new. That said, there's a new type of data. Means I actually have to embrace it. Otherwise, I will treat it like a black box or like a black magic. I don't know, just throw any machine learning until it's actually fit, which probably doesn't really sound wise. We will make a mistake. It's probably involves some pains, your ankle would actually probably pains, and a little bit unsettled feelings. I don't really like being seen by others. But that's, once you actually embrace it, once you actually really understand it, then you can actually dance it nicely. Like, what every year that you actually do in ball, university ball. So, last one. So, like learning dancing, every wrong steps counts, and that's actually fine. So it is undeniable that the future city would be built upon the technology, but it doesn't mean that we have to be technology-centric. On contrary, we should actually be able to create a sustainable, inclusive, and robust and resilient city and society. We actually need to adjust everything to our needs and behavior, which basically human is actually in the center. And then this is also influence our decisions, whether we will use or benefit from the data and the design of the system and the governments that support this advancement of the system. So with that, then I will stop my presentations. Before that, I will just want to thank you to all the funders and all the friends and the colleagues who kind of support these professorship positions. I'm really grateful and I'm really thankful for people from the ministry, from Lower Austria, from FFK, from Landschaft, from Stadwin, Wienelin, and Yusak Forum. So thank you very much. And also immensely support from the Institut. And also in this opportunity, I extend invitations to collaborate with us. We are new groups, new subgroups, let's put it like that. And we are very, very keen to collaborate with any of you. Our door will always be open, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Susilo, for this very inspiring talk. The floor is now open for questions. We can have questions from the room, but there's also the possibility to post questions on the internet, and I will be given cards with those questions. So who wants to go first? There's a question from the back.
Thank you very much for your talk and for your interesting presentation. I would like to ask you, because of course we always think about sustainability and carbon, saving carbon and everything, but most of the elements that you mentioned are actually behavioral, making transportation better. Isn't there not only also the chance that actually the transportation system, procedures and related problems are getting actually worse? For example, transportation with trucks. If you're able to save revenue for optimizing the workforce rather than minimizing transportation itself. So how is the interplay between these different topics in your field?
Thank you for very nice questions. And this is actually highlight why we actually need to these system level impacts. As all the examples that I have actually providing, and most of the studies that we're actually having now, they only focus on a specific case, on their own kind of tunnel visions, on a specific indicators, for example, as you said, how you actually minimize the benefit or how to actually optimize the system. But then nobody really think on, well, when you actually optimize the system, the roads would actually be better and people would actually travel more, and at the end, it probably doesn't really end up with a lower CO2. So that's actually true. And this is also why, for example, what Professor Gundemann, for example, do in system dynamic is try to actually link with the changing of, let's say, in the macro level, the changing of one decisions, how this actually relate with, let's say, the impact in other decisions, for example, with the emissions or with the fuel use or with the economy or with basically with the employment rate, etc. So this method is actually, and this kind of view is actually start to be adopted. The method has been there for a long time, but recently, actually, with all the view that you provide, it's actually start to actually get attractions. And that's why, at least in last European School project, this kind of approach has been the center of type of research that we should actually push further. So that's pretty much means that I guess the answer in the short one is that wait for it, or to be continued, soon it will be there. But it is, that's the way we actually have been start to actually change our mind on that respect. Have I answered your questions? Yeah.
Okay, can we get the follow-up question?
Hi, Yusak.
Hi.
Very nice to see you again, and thank you very much for this amazing talk. I have a question. It's not really related to something specific of your research, but since you are new in Austria, kind of, and me too, by the way, I would like to know if you already have a little bit of a taste of how the society here will react or reacts already to digitalization in transport. And I'm actually more referring to the topic of automation. Can you give us some insights regarding your experience so far with the topic?
Sure. I have to say that my experience limited on these automations, in particular on automated bus. So I have not involved in automated car. But then, especially in Austria, but then the way I see it, I think Austrian society, including research society, they are much more cautious. They're also a bit more skeptic compared with the previous society that I have been. It probably is also because it's influenced by the industry of the society. In Sweden, we're really proud of our Scania and our Ericssons and 5G. So we just have to make it work. So whilst in here, people are actually much more cautious in the sense that, well, yeah, it probably doesn't really work. We should probably have to wait a little bit. It doesn't really deliver as it promised. So that's kind of rhyme. But then at the same time, they keep trying. So it is not that I'm saying that they are skeptic. They're pretty open. But then compare with what my reference point, they are more careful, I would say.
Okay, can you get the microphone to Professor Sommer in the second row?
You are an expert in human behavior in automation of transport, and I would like to ask you, do you have a feeling when will we introduce in Europe, for example, automated motorways? That means that it's allowed to use the motorway by a fully automatic car. Do you have a feeling for that? When could this happen? In 5, 10, 20 years?
I actually don't know in the sense, it will. In the sense that because there is a strong push from the industry, it will. Now, the question is, I think it's, instead of technology, it's more on the law and liability. And this is something that is not really solved yet. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know how much the law will be rolled out. And it's actually, what I could say is that it may actually take longer than if we had this in Asia. Because I understand how the law designed much better back then on that region rather than in here. And then if I would also allowed to add, at least the way I had in mind in the past, before automations of vehicles, probably truck platooning would come first, because essentially that's pretty much same, but then it's much more control and safer approach than any random vehicles automated on the highway.
Does that answer the question? Yes. Yeah. Okay, I have one question from the internet. Mm-hmm. What needs more attention in future, utilizing benefits or avoiding adverse effects of digitalization automation? How can we find out if we are acting responsibly?
That's a tough question.
So if you want to read it again.
I think the answer would be, it's pretty much like, would you encourage your kids to learn how to walk? When they actually learn how to walk, they will fall, and they will cry, and their head will hit something. Hopefully not, but eventually, after, in few months, once or twice will happen. So if we've been too protective, then what happened is that then we just kind of wait and see until everybody will actually start implementing it. Now, the risk is that then, by then, we will just follow. We will fail to materialize, or not the word, make the value of this opportunity, rather than we will actually miss the time window to be a leader and to actually set the standard if we actually just wait. Of course, as the one who actually do the first, you can actually see the Brits when they actually build the trains and this underground stuff. They make tons of mistakes, which they actually have still to pay until today because things just become so extremely expensive. But then at the same time, they also capitalize a lot since from the advancement of their knowledge. So I think that's a strategic decisions that we should wait. We should take whether we just want to wait and follow, and take whoever product that will throw to us, or we would like to try our luck and see whether we can be a leader in a particular technology.
Okay, thanks. We have another question from the room.
A similar question in that direction. What do you think that it's industry-driven, or can you influence with your professorship some of the developments which are probably not favorable for society as a whole? Thinking about, you talked about modeling. And when you talk about this 4-step model, then we have always Wardrop's first and second principle. We want to have user-centric or rather system-optimized traffic. It's one example. But do you think that you can add to this general questions of how much is society-driven and how much is industry-driven in automation in your professorship?
Thank you for the questions. I think it has to be hand in hand. At least that's the situations that I'm familiar with in my previous environment. So the thing is, yes, industry would have an agenda that they would like to push. But then at the same time, we as an academic, we can also say that, hey, by the way, we can also provide some kind of thinking and research and development for you, because people from industry or practitioners, they, I don't know in here, but what I know in other country, their decision is really based on profit and stakeholders, means they cannot really explore. And this is an opportunity that we can offer to them, but then at the same time, I don't think it's our duty to make money for them. It's for us just to kind of, as a neutral partner, to show, hey, by the way, there's probably other way that probably not less profitable than if you actually go to this way. So at least that's the way I used to work in the past. For example, when I deployed this automated bus, yes, Nobina as an operator, they really actually have a certain target that they actually have to fulfill. But then at the same time, we said that, well, if you actually have a thing of your roots, or if you actually operate this and that, or if you actually develop this or target this market, you probably can perform better or at least same without do more damage, let's put it like that. So I think that's a privilege for us as the people who live in academics, in the sense that we don't have paperwork for them that we have to fill, or shareholders that we need to please. We can explore, given that they allow us to do so.
Okay, we have another question from the room.
Yusak, first of all, I want to express that I'm very glad to have you here in Austria as a colleague. It's a big pleasure, warm welcome from my side. One question about your assessment. You cited Hegerstrand, 1974, I suppose, his time-space prisms and the constraints. What kind of constraint would you think will be reduced by the use of digitalization?
Thank you, Georg. The constraints that definitely will weakening is distance. With digitalizations now, I can actually talk with my mom now and then, although they actually live 11,000 kilometers from here. I don't really need to see her in person, although it's really lovely to see her in person. So that's actually kind of weakening the impact of distance, and also kind of showing that it's also weakening the meaning of a time constraint, like opening shops, closing shops. So in the past, I remember when I was a postdoc in the Netherlands, at a time on weekend, they actually still close. So Saturday and Sunday still close. So on Friday, I actually have to run every single week, just, 5 o'clock something, because they will stop at 6, just to actually join the rest of the crowd in Delft to buy some goods to survive over the weekend. which is not happening again now, because now with all this delivery service, etc., I can still eat over the weekend, although I have nothing on my fridge. So basically, there is a distance, and time is just becoming much weaker now.
Okay, we have another question from Rainer Tössinger.
Oh, thank you. Yusak, when I think about automated driving private passenger vehicles, which is probably or individual driving private passenger vehicles, which is probably the most high-hanging fruit in this context, what would you think of when you take all these factors together? Which is the factor which is most limiting speed of development? Do you think it's more about technological development, or because at the moment technology doesn't seem to be right there where it should be for fully automated driving vehicles, or is it more the human factor in terms of reluctance of people or attitudes which feel uncomfortable, or is it more legal questions which need to be solved, which you also addressed in terms of who is responsible in case anything happens, or is it something else? What would you think is about the limiting factor which limits the speed of development in this direction?
That's a very complicated question. I think it's all of them. As an engineer, I would like to say we can solve everything. As an engineer, that's because by the end of the day, that is just a machine. I think the challenge is that how to actually create the right tools, and I do not think we are there yet. So then, if we don't actually know what we create or what kind of tools that really fit with our need, then basically the waiting time is still endless. The functions of time. So that is, that's unfortunate. I would just leave it there, if I may. Otherwise, we go to philosophical discussions.
Okay, do we have more questions? Okay, if that's not the case, then I will hand over to our rector, Professor Hubert Hadenauer, to formally close the session.
So before it's getting philosophical, we close the session and continue then the philosophy and the questions outside. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Susilo for your impressive talk. I think it was really nice to see the vision you have, and also, I think we realized this from the questions, people are really curious in what you are doing, even if we don't really know how it works, I have to say. So we have great hope in you, and maybe in 5 or 10 years you tell us exactly how it works.
Exactly.
So this would be great. Before we close, so a big hand for Professor Susilo for the nice talk, and also the questions he answered. Before I close the session, I would like to thank the people here from our technique. Those on the screen, you can't see this. There is a large group of people who make sure that everything works on time, and you do a great job. You have learned it the hard way the last couple of months, but we get used to it. Also our social media, there are constantly social media things, so Jakob Weg is doing this, and then also the Bettina Fernsebner from our public relation office. Thank you for being here. Then our photographer, where is he? Oh, he takes all the nice pictures. And especially das Veranstaltungsmanagement, so I don't know how to translate this into English, but the persons who organize, the organizing committee here to organize everything. So thanks for doing this great job. I also would like to invite you for philosophical talks outside. Yeah? We have prepared some drinks and I guess some food according to the corona rules. So those who are at home and observe us on the screen, sorry guys, you have to you have to organize your own drinks. Those who are here, you are welcome to this reception and to have some more inspiring talks about mobility and whatever it is. Thank you, Professor Susilo.
Thank you
to all of you for coming. And I close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.